Hi, welcome to another episode of Cloud Unplugged.
Cool, welcome to Cloud Unplugged. I am with Jay Keshur again.
Did you have to think of my last name there? That was quite a bit.
Well, I didn't know whether to just stop there, and I thought
Yeah.
I probably need to say your surname because
Nice,
if someone's listening, it could be any Jay.
Just
more than one
random
Jay.
J's. Yeah.
Every time we tend to come to the podcast, it'll be things we're seeing in customers and kind of identifying patterns and challenges and things like that. But one of the things that we're going to discuss is consistency on, I guess, delivering into the cloud. Obviously, it's called Cloud Unplugged, so makes sense.
Oh.
And when and why you would need consistency and what the trade-offs are and what companies probably need it and what companies might not need it.
At the stage of the company that you're at, or what you're trying to do, or something like that.
Yeah, because I think one of the things we're definitely seeing is, depending on your business model, like if you're doing M&A and acquisitions, or you're scaling up and you've just had another round of money, by not having any foundational things in place, as in things that you can scale on, there's then a high cost, because then you've got to then suddenly work out, actually this isn't a thing we can scale on, what we've just done, and actually now how are we going to manage this thing we've just bought,
Exactly.
and how's it going to work with us as a company,
or because there's no consistency, you are trying to figure it out every single time because it's inconsistent. There's no pattern that you're adopting.
yeah
So then, because you have to figure it out every time, it's naturally slower, right? You're not oh yeah, I know how to be consistent in my organization. This is how I be consistent. So half of the work is already done for you, and then you're just using that.
Yeah, and this is probably more though, I think, if consistency hadn't been a requirement at the beginning necessarily, and it's been more organic, say you've delivered in a more organic way and things have worked, and that's speed maybe mattered, the time to market really mattered.
Yeah.
And you didn't necessarily see the upfront value of investing in that, then usually those types ways of doing things properly, which could take more time but set you up for the future, weren't appealing at that point in time. Because
to a certain degree though, right, I guess there's probably levels of consistency. So maybe, let's say, a really concrete example, let's say the application architecture that you were going to be delivering was not consistent with something that you delivered previously, but the process that you used to do that was consistent. So for example, you did things using infrastructure as code as an example, right? So you're using the same way of doing it, but not necessarily the architectural pattern that you're using. So, and that's because it was faster to do something via, I don't know, containers rather than IaaS or something like that, right? So, so I guess consistency can be, you can think of consistency at lots of different levels, and each of those levels gives you there's a pro and a con to each one. So if you do it at a process, then maybe consistency in process has a much higher need for the people to all be on the same page, as an example. You probably have to have principles or something that guide that consistency so that they can be autonomous in the way that they're adopting that consistency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then if, let's say, you're trying to move consistency to technology, then you probably have to have something a little bit more concrete in, okay, if I want to deliver the same as another team in the organization, how can I make sure that that's consistent? Well, someone probably needs to maintain some reusable thing so that I can be delivering consistently. And who is that normally? Is it that project team? Is it a central team? What is that? What does that look like? So that's, I guess, where it starts getting quite interesting that we see in our space, in the cloud space, right?
But there's different levels of consistency then And standards. I guess standardizing is the bit that's giving you consistency, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
By standardizing on certain things. And like the things that probably then will be problematic are going to be people. If everyone's delivering in a different way, once something is delivered, then the supportability of it, because if it looks and feels different and has different ways of being operated, that's another cost.
Yeah.
Lack of reusability, because basically there is because everyone's delivering differently, you don't even know if you're delivering the same things or different things. There's going to be no reusability because you can't necessarily.
I guess that's lack of reusability is the lack of consistency.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying, like, if I'm going on the negative run of what are the things that would probably cost, as in like what would you want to, what are you optimizing on, which would be like people, and support, run costs, security, reusability.
Why would security? I mean, I think I know, but why would security be?
Because I guess if you've got 50 different shapes of different things, then that's 50 things, different shapes to try and assure.
Yeah.
Right. So you're like, how would I know that those slight variations have given me the level of assurance that I need and confidence that the data's being protected, because we seem to have a different way of going about something in different places. So
it's normally because of the people side and not having the like depth and breadth of skills across all of the inconsistent ways that you're delivering is never going to be, like, it's impossible to be the best at every single thing, right? So because of that, maybe you're lacking that kind of security posture. Is that
basically, if you're not necessarily you're lacking the security posture. It wasn't necessarily to do with the skills. It's more to do with if you can assure one thing and you standardize on like how you expect that thing to be done, then you're it's only if that thing's changing that you need to assure it once. If people are reusing that thing that you've assured, then obviously then you're getting the economies of scale, I suppose, on like not having to reinvest in assuring another flavor of that same thing. Or the outcome's the same, but it's been done differently. So you're like, okay, well, I need to figure out how that's been done, because we've just done that exact same outcome over there in a different way, and then another outcome over there in a different way. And so now I've got to assure 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, and that's very resource intensive. Yeah,
exactly. So there's that. I guess there's also like the initial, thing of delivering it in the first place. So if you're like trying to, I don't know, go to market with a new application or something like that, and you've got no consistent patterns, then already you're almost starting on a bad footing, right? You're starting from a kind of lower position. So if you already had, like, if you knew the infrastructure that you were trying to target as your hosting element or something like that, then you can maybe create a pattern on that whilst you're iterating on the application, or before you've even started iterating on the application, so that then you can start iterating with like a known standard. Because sometimes, like, even before you have, say, the funding for your application, you could probably get a bunch of foundations in to give you that head start, so that as soon as you do have that funding, you could start straight away. Or you're in like a design stage of your application process, like building process. You can think about pattern wise how you would support it.
Because a lot of, like, if we were to look at, not naming customer names obviously, but if you look at how a lot of these organizations have grown, there's usually an element of, there's like a catalyst change that occurs. And it could be the business needs to grow and they've stagnated, maybe their current, like the way they've currently operated is stagnated. And maybe the way to grow is to start acquiring. So then you're on the acquisition front. Or they've stagnated and they need different product lines, creating like slight divergence in market types. Or they need to basically take what they've done but scale it up. And maybe they want to go regional. Maybe they need to like invest, more into different market areas as opposed to market types. So every time there's that catalyst to any of those requires some either integration work, I suppose, really. If you're going to go to new regions and you're going to put your business in new regions and you've got to integrate back, or you're going to have a way of delivering that service in a way that could be scoped to new regions. If you're doing M&A, you obviously want to streamline the business unless you're going to leave it on its own as a separate entity, a bit like probably like Instagram and Facebook, kind of treated differently. So I guess it depends on your business model. Maybe you don't need to do anything.
Well, you're always gonna, even if you're treating it differently, because you've effectively now got two.
It's going to be doubling up on something.
You're doubling up the cost.
But yeah, I guess you could streamline some bits, but not
always. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh yeah, I meant more though for related to this podcast for like Cloud Unplugged. I guess more cloud orientated.
Yeah.
It's those types of functions, if infrastructure wise and everything else. Unless you're going to start aligning it to how you do things and like align it to the teams, which you could obviously do, there might not be. I don't know whether they did or they didn't do that.
I guess like some of the patterns that we've seen is, when a company gets acquired and they're both in different cloud providers as a thing. There's lots of benefits in converging on the cloud provider if you're not using some unique service that only that cloud provider has, right? Or like that cloud provider differentiates. So let's just say it's like, basic sort of compute, networking, storage, on some sort of scale. As soon as you are putting more inside one cloud provider, then even from a commercial perspective, like you're going to get a better deal from the cloud provider. You're probably going to be able to increase your kind of commit for the year or 3-year contract or whatever, and get a bigger discount because of that. And then it's the cost of the skills that you have within your organization. So because you're not having to hire like AWS skills and Azure skills and Google skills and all of that kind of stuff, you can consistently have like one way of operating and one, let's say you had all 3 cloud providers and you had a cloud team of, 4 or 5 people against each cloud provider. A couple of those people go away and you probably need, someone there for sick leave and holidays and all of that cover, right? But if it was just one cloud provider, you wouldn't necessarily have a team of 15. You might have a team of, say, 6 or something like that. So you can see how it starts getting quite efficient and how much money you can start saving even from a people perspective, let alone the kind of
operationalizing the business, which is what most, you're doing acquisitions, that's at some point comes into question, doesn't it? Because you're like, we don't want to pay twice.
Exactly.
For similar things. But if you don't have standardized patterns, I guess having a vision for how you're delivering something, like you mentioned kind of architecture, but there is a point of inflection where if you didn't have the scale, the cost of which you can make the cloud work for scale can not necessarily justify the need, because you don't need it, right? So yes, you could do it early and plan for the future, but you're going to be paying for it until the point that you need it.
Yeah.
So you don't want to necessarily do all of that early and be like, right, we're going to sort out, especially if it's like landing zone stuff, let's sort out a connectivity pattern, let's sort out like account isolation, let's do all of these things. You're like, well, we've only got 2 apps.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, why do we need all of that? So definitely for certain size businesses, SMBs, I don't think you would want to ever do that early anyway.
Depends though, right? Like
no, it doesn't.
So like if you're one of those companies and you've only got 2 apps, then I think you're still getting something from, like, maybe cost isn't the thing that you're optimizing for, maybe it's security, and if you've got a consistent way of delivering, then naturally, like we talked about, you're gonna have a better security posture, like if you've got a landing zone and all that, policies in place.
Definitely, I agree with all that, but I think it might, like you're saying, it depends what's important to you.
Yeah, speed.
But if security, because obviously the cloud vendors, like they've got amazing ways of doing this stuff, but every time they solve the problem, there's a cost of how they've solved it.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's free.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like, hey, yeah, just use all these services. They're all free.
Yeah.
So there's,
aren't they?
Yeah.
What?
So they like basically say,
pay the
hey, we've done a
Jarvis.
scan, especially if it's Azure and you put a Defender on it, tells you all the things you've done wrong. You're like, well, you don't have Defender, and you don't have like Sentinel, and you don't have all these other things. You're like, I know.
Turned on all of the
I know,
things that
because
cost
it's
me
too
money.
expensive. But then you're not secure,
Yeah.
you know, because you didn't turn all these things on. It's like, but it's a conscious decision.
Yeah.
But I think at the point that you move as a business, where you can then suddenly what becomes important is, well, actually we now need to sort these things out.
Because of data, right?
Yeah.
Generally, it's because you have like customer data that you don't want to lose, don't want to get fined for, or something like that.
Yeah, or you're going to grow.
Or
Do
that,
you know what I mean? You're growing to the point that it's becoming a concern.
Mm.
Or you're then got a model where you now, like we're saying, like from an application architectural point, to your point, oh, we didn't really think about the architecture, but now we need to deliver it in a new region. And actually how we've architected doesn't lend well to like deploying everything that we've done organically. We're then going to have to really think through, because we iterated to this end state. It wasn't that we went from blatted
Design.
everything
Yeah.
and then reprovisioned it all in a region. So now we've not thought about moving into a new region. We don't so you only have to rethink maybe some of the decisions you've made, which is a challenge to think through up front, but there are definitely some decisions you can make and certain technologies you can standardize on. I imagine that would make your life a lot easier.
I guess
for portability purposes and things like that.
If someone was like listening to this podcast and we were and they were like trying to get some level of consistency from where they were, like what would you say like the kind of top 3 things that they would maybe have to start thinking about now would be, depending on, you know, just as sort of basics?
So if I was to start from the beginning, I think if there's a way of packaging up something, the application side, that could be like WASM, or it could be containers.
Yeah.
So long as you didn't necessarily like the way it runs, and standardizing that will obviously help, because then there's a bit more portability to different technologies, because lots of different technology can support containers, for example. It's not just, say, Kubernetes. And so I'd probably start thinking about like what's the delivery, what's the package element for delivering applications, and how can I standardize on that no matter what the language was.
Right.
And that gives me some, like, that's like the first thing.
Yeah.
That then means that how people are then delivering is consistent, because it means like whatever language they're using, in the end, that's the artifact pre-cloud.
Yeah.
Then I'd then probably work out then what are the security requirements, because that's like people-based and developer-based. But if I get that early, because they're going to do something before even the infrastructure, I'd probably cordon that off first. And then I'd have to look at the cloud to be like, okay, well, how do we want to design it? And obviously landing zones does all of this for you out of the box to a point, because it gives you a lot of the architectural principles of like isolating the workloads and managing single sign-on and access to the cloud. And so I'd probably start thinking about like what of all these things matters the most.
Yeah.
I think single sign-on, obviously, and identity would be the key thing next, because it's a massive security uplift. And then connectivity, because that's the bane of everyone's life, is like, how does all of these things connect? Especially if I'm doing acquisitions, or especially if there's something in the future, or we're going to cross cloud, or we might end up wanting to go on-prem, or all these things. Then I would want to design a connectivity pattern. And the earlier you do that, the better, because obviously you're going to have devices, and devices will probably need to have some VPN-y style element if everything's going to be, well, some things are going to be private.
Yeah.
Then that fits into that connectivity pattern already, which would fit into the developers' kind of ways of working. So you'd want to kind of bite that off. And then security would then follow, I think, from that point on. Then like, okay, well, we've got single sign-on, which is more access, but it's got an element of security around it.
Yeah.
And then it would be more like audit and logging and of things. And then once you kind of put those architectural principles in, which is like, how do I know what's going on?
Yeah.
You know, how can I make sure no one tampers with anything? How do things talk to each other? What are we standardizing on for delivery? And how what's the technology underneath it that makes it more portable, and I cordon those things off first and access. Then I'd say they were like the most key things.
And like, what would you do this with, like ClickOps, all as kind of,
Yeah.
you know, through there?
Yeah.
That's what drives consistency. I mean,
Yeah. If you click about
Just
and do
like,
all that.
boom,
You just like
super easy.
really fast mouse
Yeah.
action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what you do is you record
Yeah.
your mouse of where you click in.
Yeah.
And then you
Play
basically
it back.
Yeah, you play
That's
it
how-
back.
yeah.
You put it in BDD style tests. With Cypress, and it can go through the UI for you, and you can then automate it. You automate
I've
the
seen you
click off.
just write your notepad, like John, click here in the top left-hand corner.
There's Selenium that runs and just goes up into the browser and goes through the experience each time. Tear it all down.
There we go.
I mean, this is like pre-delivered. These are more like architectural standards more than anything else. It's like they're the things that you'd want to standardize on.
But they're like the technology standards almost, I guess. Like
they're like pattern standards rather than like how you're going to do it.
Exactly.
But you're right. I think like then when you get into how you're going to do it, then you're into the rest. But it's more, I guess, requirement driven, which is like things need to talk to things, obviously, and people need to talk to those services too. So you've already got connectivity is already a massive key element in that. And if you've got any identity and somebody needs to do something, then that's it. You've got identity straight out the gate. So it's like it's those things seem like paramount stuff. And then how do I track all those things are going on, and what happens if I've got an issue, and where would I find the order of those things, and how would I protect that in case, I needed to kind of search through what happened, and then I'd kind of worry about that bit afterwards, and then policy, and then all the other things, and then I'd worry about how after. I think once I'd worked those things out, I'd then work out like, okay, now we've defined what we need, now how are we going to do it, and then I'd show everyone my ClickOps skills and everyone would be like, oh my God, I've never seen
what a clicker.
Never seen such
clicker.
Such ClickOps.
This is the fastest clicking
Exactly.
guy
I'd then probably
ever.
become insta famous overnight, and then I guess infrastructure as code and defining it declaratively, putting those foundations, using a landing zone obviously would be key at that point, because like why reinvent the wheel when they've already given you the patterns to do all of this, and the code's kind of there already from the cloud providers that you can already work with.
What about like other kind of principles? So like, there's stuff like using technology, infrastructure as code, landing zones, this kind of stuff. But like process, like how you're delivering something, whether you're going to use sort of agile teams so from a process perspective, everyone has a framework of delivery. Or from like a principle perspective, you might say, we want everything to be secure by default, so not using unencrypted ways of communicating between services, or things like that. So
they're like security. Well, they're different. I guess security policies.
Yeah,
are like different. That's a complete different realm. But that would have to come after, I think, you understood how you're even going to get the bare bone principles of things to even work. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how's this even going to work once we've delivered it, even irrespective of any security?
Right.
Because those are patterns that I need in place to scale on, because there's going to be things that need to, otherwise it functionally won't work. And then there's then those other like more non-functional.
But they might
requirements.
they might actually be an issue with how you're doing something, right? So if you've got like if you've got a principle of secure by default or something like that, there are some services, I mean, maybe not in this day and age, but that just don't support say TLS or something or whatever. So you're going to rule them out because you've got that principle. Maybe it doesn't happen so much in this day and age.
But I mean, that's different because that comes later, I suppose. So it's like the order of magnitude is like trying to find the right patterns to scale on that are simpler than others, and then putting policies in. I mean, once you know you can group things to manage the policies against, it's like, how do I organize a way of grouping policies so that I can have exemptions, and that actually maybe this group, if it's an acquisition, I can treat it differently for a while and then remediate a lot of those things. So I think all of those things, like those principles, are more patterns that will allow you to like scale well because they're more informative
if they've been put in as policy or things like that.
Like thinking through what you're going to do and then how you're going to do it is more informative than just looking from an implementation perspective. I'm like, we've got all these things, and it's like, well, I think though paving the way of like how you manage those things well will give you the economies of scale and allow you to scale, but not thinking of those things and it being randomized slightly, because you could still do policies in different ways. It's more like how you're going to meet it in a way that allows you to scale, which is kind of very landing. That's what I liked about landing zone principles, is that it's thought through.
Yeah, exactly.
On like how you're going to approach it rather than just technically what you can do. And standardizing on it. So
it's horizontal scale, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is.
Landing zones is completely about horizontally scaling.
Exactly.
Because we know vertical doesn't work.
Yeah, vertical doesn't work. Yeah. So.
Which is great.
Anyway, that was short and sweet.
Yes.
On those things.
But consistency is good. I guess there's always a bit of a trade-off to a certain degree with consistency, in that if you try to architect for consistency potentially too early, then maybe the cost of doing so might be higher than the benefit.
I think so. If you're coming from an informed place, if you don't realise the value of consistency and just be thinking naively that you don't need it, then that's different from being very intentional of like knowing you're compromising on not having it. But there is definitely, if you can standardize even on the dev experience and the developer ways of working, those things, then you're going to be in a better place.
100%.
Even if you don't go landing zones. So they'd definitely say like anything you're going to do, if it's got an element of scale on it, then you need to think about how everyone's going to be working with it. Because that's a high cost. If everyone's like working differently, it's going to be a bit of a mess.
Yes.
So, that's probably the key thing, I think.
There we have it. Consistency. Cool. Do it.
Exactly. All right. Cheers.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.